Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another webinar of the Wealth Academy series. We thought we would do things a bit differently this time and have it in the afternoon. Normally, we have these midday, and I often wonder if it's maybe clashing with some work schedules or something like that. So we thought we'd maybe move this one in the afternoon. And it's interesting. I think we got a couple new people joining, so. I'm always glad to always try to move it to a more convenient time. But yeah, thanks for dialing in, guys. So just to quickly touch on how we've been working with clients and how we traditionally used to work with clients. When Rance was started in 2015, it was very much a securities broking business where we were just, trading clients and would often add a bit of a private brokerage to clients looking for more private broking dealing. Then once we got our Cat2 license approved, we then ended up moving a bit more on the managed solution side of things, where we can assist clients on a more discretionary basis with model portfolios. We've got three at the moment. We've got obviously our flagship Ransos Global Equity portfolio that's building up to quite a long track record now. I think close to like 6, 7 years now. Then we've also got the AR portfolio, which is a bit more of a new portfolio, trying to capture a bit more of the AR theme run by Viv Govender. And then we've also got a local equity portfolio. Along with that, we've also been launching lots of structured products, and we've seen huge uptick in that. We recently had a structure that actually cashed out a coupon of 14% in US dollars. And we've now starting to see more investors actually be a bit more interested in something that's a bit more uncorrelated to the general market. And then quite recently, we've actually also added a new sort of division to our practice, which is wealth and advisory. Now, that's where I sit. And within the sort of framework of wealth and advisory, what we've tried to achieve for clients is assist them from everything holistically. So, not just looking at their offshore share portfolio, actually looking at their retirement annuities, actually taking into account estate planning, looking at their tax frees. And then what we like to do with our clients is actually prepare a whole balance sheet where we unpack all these products, unpack how these products will impact them, and then from there, make more advice-based sort of suggestions on how we can look at optimizing this portfolio. And I mean, I think we've seen great success in it. So I think we've had this wealth and advisory sort of division now for 2 years, and we've seen huge sort of interest from the client base across it. Again, just touching on our partners, I think a thing we can't ignore is our independence. We've obviously partnered up with all the major providers, both locally and globally, just to try and ensure, obviously, we can, optimize what the clients is getting. Along with being in the media, I know both Viv and Gary have been very, very active in the media. Gary's actually going to be speaking on 7:02 tonight, so please dial in and let's see what he has to say. And then, yeah, I think finally just unpacking the sort of Wealth Academy series we've been running. The purpose of, me sort of starting this was, like I said, when I joined the industry, I saw, there were so many different naming conventions for all the products out there. And it frustrated me because obviously you now as an investor invest in one thing thinking it has these certain tax benefits or estate planning benefits. And there's a whole bunch of rules and mechanics behind it, which actually you may not have been aware of initially. So what we try to do with this Wealth Academy series is unpack each product in quite a bit of detail. Now, obviously, we do this via a webinar. And like I said initially, we've recently moved the webinar from being a 12:30 slot to a 5:30 slot to accommodate for people after work. But of course, some people may be busy on the day or some people may not be able to attend the webinar. So what we like to do is we have a YouTube channel called The Wealth Academy, and we upload all the videos we've discussed and we put them on the YouTube channel. So if there is anything you missed, if you do have to jump out halfway through this video, you can always look at the YouTube channel and have a look through it. I would also say, if you are interested, please drop us a like or subscribe. It is always great seeing some engagement on the channel. Also, a point I would like to raise with this is we've unpacked most of the investment products out there. Now, once I've finished this living annuity webinar, there's actually no real new products I can uncover. So please, I'd love to get some feedback from the audience here today. Please, in the notes, drop us some comments of, some topics you'd like us to unpack next in the Wealth Academy. We'll obviously take a look through. You can either pop us a comment on the YouTube video or drop something through on the chat, and we'll make sure to address these topics in future videos. So, looking at what's on the agenda today, the email signature that went through was how to maximize your retirement income strategy. And I think the main way you do that is via annuities. So, you'll see on the agenda today, we're going to unpack the type of annuities out there, the mechanics of a life annuity, mechanics of a living annuity, the tax benefits of these structures, a new, well, not new concept, but a concept I think many investors aren't aware of, and that's Section 10C. We're also going to look at some estate planning for these products, and we're going to end off with a case study. So let's first unpack the type of annuities. So I had a bit of a debate in the office today on how they thought I should best present these type of annuities. And I sat trying to be imaginative for a while, but I think maybe this is the best I could come up with. But please let me know what you guys think of it. But effectively, I like to think of the two types of annuities, a bit more like, I want to say trees, and we can unpack it as to how I came up with this reasoning now. But how I traditionally like to think of living annuities is a bit more like a tree in the sense that it's relatively flexible in the income options. And why I say that is you can, cut down a branch, you can add a swing to another branch. It's pretty flexible in what you can do with a tree, as weird as that does sound. Trees are also subject to environmental risks. If it doesn't rain for a period of time, that would obviously impact the growth. Exact same aspect on how the markets can impact a living annuity. Living annuities are vehicles that you can get once you retire, and these are subject to market risk. If there is a drawback or bear markets, that will impact the capital value of your living annuity. One thing to note with living annuities is these obviously can be passed down to beneficiaries. If you do have a living annuity, you can nominate a beneficiary on that product. And if you pass away, it can then be passed over to beneficiaries. And again, just touching again on the flexible income options, when you have a living annuity, you can change the amount of income you get on an annual basis. You can change the frequency of that income to either be annually, semi-annually, or quarterly. Whereas, with other vehicles, they may not be as flexible in the nature. If we now look at life annuities or guaranteed annuities, for some reason, I just thought they resonate most with almost a cactus, where they're very fixed in nature. What you get in the beginning is what you get for the rest of the period. Also, just like a cactus isn't really subject to environmental risk. A cactus can go years or months without water, just like a life annuity. A life annuity can continue to provide investors with income despite the market return. If investors get a life annuity and they find themselves in a period in a bear market where markets have been performing negatively for 5 years, that won't make any difference to the income they're getting at all. So there's no market risk attached to life annuities. The downside with that is there's also no legacy attached to life annuities. If you pass away, you pass away with your capital. You can't pass over a life annuity to beneficiaries. There is ways around it, which we will unpack, but the main structure of it is not really there. It's not really to be used as an inheritance vehicle. It's to more be used, obviously, to ensure income of the policy owner. Then again, there are hybrid options to this too. You don't have to go with one or the other. You can go with a mix of each. And you can do a living annuity with a life annuity component. So if we unpack life annuities, who are the suitable investors? Well, I think a suitable investor would be someone looking for guaranteed income for life and doesn't want to take any market risk. How do you go about doing that? Well, effectively, how you do this is you take your capital amounts at retirement and you swap it with an insurance product that guarantees you a fixed monthly income for the rest of your life. And these are provided by the major life insurance providers out there, the likes of Sanlam, Momentum, Discovery. These are the big players out there that can offer guaranteed annuities. So what are the key benefits when you look at guaranteed annuities? For me, the biggest benefits, and I've often seen this benefit across clients who take interest in it, is that there's no longevity risk. What does that mean? If you've got 10 million Rand and you put it in a life annuity, you'll be guaranteed a certain amount of income for the rest of your life. And you don't have to worry about any market risk. You don't have to worry about ever outliving your capital. You know that for the rest of your life, you're going to get your income, which is a huge benefit. especially when you consider about what only 6% of South Africans can afford to retire comfortably. You've all of a sudden got a vehicle that can guarantee you income for life. Another big benefit is there's absolutely no investment risk. I can't tell you guys enough how many clients we come across that are so paranoid about the markets, and understandably so. People stomach market volatility in many different ways. All of a sudden, there's a product out there that can ensure income, that can ensure your hard-earned capital will be fine. Of course, people will be interested in it. And I think finally, no portfolio management. And I think this more alludes to when people actually have a bad experience with either advisors or portfolio managers where they aren't managing the portfolio correctly. Sometimes we've come across living annuities whereby they're still very overweight cash or very overweight a certain asset class, like maybe overweight property when yes, property was good a couple of years ago, but you find yourself in like a sort of interest, what you call a rising interest rate environments. Maybe that's not the asset class you want to be invested in. And if you aren't properly looking after your portfolio, this could be a huge risk, which life annuities obviously alleviate this risk. Now, if we look at some of the drawbacks of a life annuity, I think for me, one of the biggest drawbacks is that you can't reverse the contract. Once you agree to get a life annuity, there's no way out. You can't get a life annuity and 2 years down the line decide this isn't the product for you and then move to a living annuity. This is guaranteed. Another big drawback is that there's no inheritance benefits. If you have a life annuity and you pass away, you unfortunately die with that capital. There's no way you can pass that over to beneficiaries. Another aspect is it's very interest rate sensitive at inception. When you get a life annuity, the rate that is initially offered to you is primarily driven into where interest rates find themselves. If you're in a high interest rate environment, it's normally a more appropriate time to get a life annuity. If you're in an interest rate environment where it's at lows, like where you find yourself in 2020 when interest rates were at record lows, that's not the best time to get a life annuity because the fixed income payments they're offering you is not suitable. So the problem I normally have with life annuities is at inception, it's a very, very important time because that is the rate you get for the rest of your life. And I think finally, there's a huge amount of currency risk attached to life annuities. What we mean by that is the amount they give you is in rands. So if you find yourself in a situation where the South African rand depreciates greatly to international currencies, your income buying power is going to reduce enormously. And that is one of the risks here. You are taking a huge amount of risk on the South African rand if you go with a life annuity. Now, again, is this to say life annuity is a bad vehicle? Absolutely not. It's to understand how this will fit with your needs and your portfolio. So how we normally like to do life annuities for clients and this whole debate, we've had many clients come to us and say, do I go with a life annuity or a living annuity? And I think it's always best to have a review. There's no real right answer at face value. When we have a review for a client, the first thing we do is we do life annuity quotes for clients. Now, there's normally what we've seen 6 key influences in life annuity quotes. The first being age, then gender, then the annual escalation selected, then sort of ad hoc sort of mechanics that could influence the premium, being, is there going to be a joint life? What that means is if you pass away, is there almost another policy owner attached to this? So if you are married, it's normally recommended to have a joint life on this living annuity. On this life annuity, whereby if something happens to you, the premium simply gets moved over to the surviving spouse. The second sort of ad hoc addition to a life annuity is capital preservation. What this means is if I die, is there going to be a capital preservation guaranteed for my beneficiaries? You can add it. The problem is this will greatly reduce the income that will be offered. And then finally, is there going to be a guaranteed term to this life annuity? What this means is that if I was to get a life annuity today and I pass away tomorrow, would there be a guaranteed term that would continue to pay out an income? Normally, the guaranteed terms range between 5 to 15 years. So I think it's always best to look at a case study. Now, let's look at Scott. Let's assume he's 63 years old. He's a male. He's married. So therefore, joint life would be quite a suitable addition to this. He's got 10 million Rand in retirement capital, and he wants this premium to escalate at 5% per annum. What we've got over here is we've actually prepared some quotes for him. I'm not going to mention the insurers. I'm just going to mention the amounts that was offered. But if you guys want, we can obviously look at doing a guaranteed quote for you at any point in time. So what we can see from this first block over here, we can see the net monthly income that was offered to Scott was 39,000 Rand a month. So what that means is that if Scott gave one of the life providers 10 million Rand, they would give him 39,000 Rand a month in net income, and that income would escalate by 5% per annum. There's also a joint life addition added to it. So that means that if Scott was to pass away in 5 years' time, his wife would receive this income for the rest of her life as if she took this policy out. There also was a capital preservation amount added. Sorry, I'm just moving away from the sun. There also was a capital preservation amount added, meaning that if George was to pass away and his wife was to pass away 2 years later, the beneficiaries would receive 10 million Rand. Is there a guaranteed term? There's no guaranteed term here because of the capital preservation that was offered. Now, if we were to look at removing the capital preservation option so that there's no capital preservation fund option and we replace it with a guaranteed term, what this means is that if Scott was to pass away, his beneficiaries would not receive 10 million, but they would receive income guaranteed for the next 10 years. And you can see over here, there is still a joint life aspect to it. And you'll see here, George will get an income of 44,000 Rand a month, a huge increase in the initial 39,000 offered. Remember, these do go up by 5% every year in all of the options. Now, in the final option, we look here, if Scott elects for no capital preservation and no guaranteed term, the income offered is 44,117 a month. Not that much of a difference in the previous option if you look at the guarantee term. So one thing that points out to me, and one thing we've often highlighted to clients, is that if you're going to go ahead with a life annuity, it's always recommended to get a guaranteed term because you often don't pay that much for it. In this case here, George will be paying, what, $15 a month for an extra 10 years guaranteed of income. For me, that is something that is definitely worth paying. Another interesting factor over here is the capital preservation. What we can see from here is the capital preservation, if George elected, would be 10 million. That means if he was to pass away, there'd be a guaranteed 10 million waiting for his beneficiaries. But you can see he's paying an awful amount for that. So in my eyes, when I normally recommend when I recommend life annuities, the guaranteed term is something I always like to do and add when doing these quotes. Now, if we look at living annuities, this is normally the more preferred vehicle across our client base. Life annuities is something we rarely get asked and really don't focus on. Living annuities is normally where we focus on. And this is designed for investors seeking flexibility and control of their retirement finances. I think if we look at the mechanics of this product, this is an investment product, so it's not an insurance product. So therefore, it is subject to market risk. This also allows investors to draw an income of between 2.5% and 17.5% of the capital value each year. And like I said, the frequency of that can fluctuate. So if we look at the key benefits of a living annuity, I think the key and the biggest one here is it offers an inheritance option for beneficiaries. If people pass away, their beneficiaries will receive the benefits of that living annuity. The next aspect is there's a potential for capital growth. Obviously, we work in markets, we're very optimistic on markets. And I mean, if you look at the long-term trend of equity markets, they do have an upward trend. So all of a sudden, when you're looking at living annuities, and if you are withdrawing a living annuity in a sustainable way, there is a very realistic way, or there's a very, very likely outcome. You can actually grow the capital. It's not like you're going to always erode the capital. That's if you're taking out, 17.5%, quite an unsustainable amount. Yes, there's obviously going to be erosion in the capital. But if you're taking out, between 2.5% and 4% of the income each year, and you're investing the capital in quite, growing useful asset classes, absolutely there can be the potential for capital growth. I think there's also great income and portfolio flexibility within living annuities. As mentioned with the income, investors can say they can either elect for 2.5 or up to 17.5% income from these vehicles. Additionally, there is portfolio flexibility. Unlike retirement annuities, living annuities are not governed by Regulation 28, meaning that if you want 100% offshore equity exposure, you can get that within a living annuity. If you want 100% cash exposure, you can get that in a living annuity. If you want hedge fund exposure, you can get that in a living annuity. There's no restriction to where you can allocate capital within these products. And I think finally, there's huge currency protection within these products. I know that may sound quite weird because it's a rand-based investment. However, because you are allowed up to 100% offshore exposure, if you do have that offshore exposure and you see a weakness in the rand, you gaining your rand value is going up. So if you have 100% of your portfolio invested offshore in a living annuity and there's 6% depreciation in the rand, your rand value has gone up by 6%, protecting you from a potentially weakening currency, which a life annuity won't capture. However, understand that living annuity is not all perfect. There's risks involved. I think one of the biggest risks that we've seen is the longevity risk. As I mentioned initially in the video, only 6% of South Africans can afford to retire comfortably. Most South Africans that have living annuities often have not saved enough, unfortunately, and the income they drawing down is, 12, 13% of the value, sometimes even 17.5%. Now, no ways you can get a guaranteed return of 17.5% every year. Therefore, there's erosion in the portfolio, and eventually, once the value gets to below 125,000, you can access the full amount, and there is then the longevity risk in the portfolio where you could outlive your capital. Another aspect is you are subject to market risk. If you're a very, very cautious investor and you don't want any equity exposure, understand that a living annuity will, in order to get suitable return, you may have to take on risk, which will obviously impact the living annuity. Now, if we unpack some of the tax benefits, I think they cannot be ignored when you look at these products. So typically, when you invest, like I said, people are often surprised when there's taxes payable. And like I said, understandably so. You receive a net income, you often pay tax away to SARS. Once you receive a net income, you often let it grow. And then all of a sudden, when there's significant growth on this investment, you then have to still pay tax over and above that. So I can understand why investors are maybe disgruntled, often quite surprised when they realize this. But I think if we look at the taxes payable, there's often 3 taxes that we've seen. There's income tax. So if you put your money in the bank, you earn an interest on that, you have to pay income tax on that interest earned. Another aspect of tax payable on investments is capital gain tax. If you buy a share and that share value goes up, you have to pay capital gains tax on that growth. Same with property. And then dividend withholding tax. If you buy shares and they pay you a dividend, that is subject to tax. All of a sudden, with living annuities, none of these taxes are applicable. So these living annuities are then all of a sudden very, very useful vehicles to hold various different assets. We've often come across cases where clients are very, very risk averse and they want 40% of their portfolio to be in income nature products. Actually, I lie, call it 80%. We've had some clients where they say, I want 80% of my portfolio exposure to be in cash and bonds. And understandably so, sometimes people are risk adverse. And if you look at South African bonds, you can get very, very attractive rates, even sometimes with the cash returns. Now, all of a sudden, if we are to put this cash and bond exposure in their personal name, they'll be paying a huge amount away in income tax. Whereas if we allocate this cash and bond exposure to a living annuity, there's absolutely no income tax payable within the product vehicle, greatly improving the return. Another way we've seen it is through share portfolios and offshore investments. We have often had clients that have had a huge amount in their living annuity. They don't require their income, so they take the minimum 2.5%, and they want the rest of the portfolio to grow. as I mentioned in the beginning of the portfolio, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we've got both an AI portfolio, a local equity portfolio, and a global equity portfolio. We have lots of clients that within their living annuity have a personal share portfolio within it. And in that personal share portfolio, they buy our AI portfolio. Now, if you think of the benefit of that, you have a tax-free vehicle that doesn't pay any capital gains tax. So you aren't paying capital gains tax on the market growth. You're not paying capital gains tax on the rand depreciation, and you can invest in a direct AI share portfolio. There really is a useful aspect to these products if used correctly. The only tax payable with a living annuity is the taxable income on the withdrawal. So if you look at that 2.5% and 17.5%, if you take out 2.5%, let's just say, and that 2.5% is, call it 30,000 Rand a year. That 30,000 Rand a year is subject to income tax like you pay with your normal salary. So that is one of the ways you do pay tax within a living annuity. So remember, within the structure, there's no income tax, no capital gains tax, no dividend withholding tax. But the moment the money is paid out, you then have to pay income tax in accordance because it's taxable income. However, there is one way to get around this, and that is using a benefit known as Section 10C. So what is Section 10C effectively? So we all know with our retirement annuity vehicles and our retirement fund vehicles, we are allowed to claim back our deductions each year. These deductions are 27.5% of your salary, capped at 350,000. So what that means is that if I'm earning, call it 2 million Rand a year, I can contribute to my retirement annuity, and SARS will rebate my 2 million Rand income by 350,000. But let's just say I want to contribute more to my retirement annuity vehicle. SARS can't prevent me from doing that. And also, they're not going to ignore the additional contribution I made. So let's just say instead of contributing 350,000, I contribute 500,000 for the year. So I've over-contributed by 150,000. That 150,000 will be known as a disallowed contribution. And Section 10C allows people to obviously over-contribute to their retirement fund. The benefit with this is that it can be used down the line to get tax-free income. So in that analogy I made, where I contribute 500,000 to my RA and I'm only allowed to contribute 350, that 150 will then be used to offset future income from my living annuity in the future. So let's just say it's my final year of retirement. I put in 500,000. I've over-contributed by 150,000. The next year I retire, I then have a living annuity. For that first year of the living annuity, I withdraw 150,000. That 150,000 withdrawal will be tax-free. So Section 10C is something I feel cannot be ignored, and many investors do not know about this. Now, if we have to look at the estate planning aspect of a living annuity, again, these are very, very beneficial products. Oops. So firstly, there's no estate duty payable. Living annuities are free from estate duty, meaning that they save, beneficiaries between 20 to 25%. This is quite a significant amount, well, actually a very significant amount. The next is executor fees. If you nominate a beneficiary to a living annuity, there's no executor fees payable, meaning that you could potentially save investors and beneficiaries 4.025% when you look at executor fees being the maximum of 3.5% with that included. And finally, what options do beneficiaries have when they receive a living annuity? Beneficiaries have three options. They can either receive the benefits of the living annuity and continue as if it was their living annuity. They can elect to receive a lump sum withdrawal. This would be subject to tax, and it would be subject to tax in the hands of the deceased. So what would that mean? If we have an investor and they didn't take out any retirement lump sum withdrawal at retirement, and they elected to go for a living annuity, and they got a living annuity, and 3 years later they passed away, that beneficiary would receive, and let's just say that beneficiary wanted to receive the lump sum, that lump sum will be taxed in the hands of the initial investor. Now, in this example, the initial investor didn't elect for retirement withdrawal. That means that the beneficiary would receive the tax-free portion of 550 from the lump sum tax tables, and then the rest would be taxed in accordance with those retirement lump sum tax tables. And finally, they can elect to take a combination of the two. They can continue with the living annuity and withdraw components. So those are the three options available to beneficiaries when receiving an inheritance from a living annuity. And again, to highlight the big benefit, when they receive that inheritance, they don't pay any estate duty and they don't pay any executive fees. So now what does all this mean? I know this is normally quite a technical breakdown, and I always like to finish off with a case study whereby we can unpack how this will impact investors. So if we again look at Scott's living annuity, what we've done over here is I want to put most of the focus on market performance. And what I often like to do is, consider looking at almost a two-part structure when constructing living annuities. So Yaku, one of our other wealth advisors, believes greatly in the sort of potting system when withdrawing income from a product. And I think it works absolutely phenomenal. So if we look at this case here, this investor has a range of different funds. They've got the 91 Go franchise fund within their living annuity, so they capture some offshore equity. They've got some income funds in there. They've got some bond funds, and they've also got some local equity funds. So upon first glance, this is a very well diversified, portfolio. It's an independent manager. Clearly, they're not focused on just one fund or one manager. It's a very good portfolio upon first glance. But one thing I'd like to consider when you're looking at the living annuity is more of a two-part system when unpacking the income. What do I mean by that? If we look at this sort of current living annuity structure, which has a range of different asset classes versus an income nature structure, what we would like to do with this two-part system is I often like to take living annuities and split them, where one portion of the living annuity is focused for income and the other portion of a living annuity is focused for growth. So if we look at the income portion of this living annuity, I would like to maybe allocate a couple of about 75% of the funds to a hedge fund, which will protect on the downside. The Peregrine Pure Hedge, for example, has never had a negative year, and add like a Coronation Strategic Income Fund, which offers very, very low risk cash exposure. So quite a very, very defensive position. So for the first part, I would like, because this will be used for income, I would like to allocate it to income nature products, have no equity exposure whatsoever. And you can see the performance here is pretty much identical. So what we can see from this green bar, that's inflation. So both strategies are beating inflation, which is great. The gray represents the industry average. The blue is my recommendation, and the red is the client's current portfolio. Now, you'll see that they're pretty much in line with the return. What we can see from this return over here is this was done over a 5-year annualized period. And you can see there that the investor's return from this portfolio was 9.2% after fees, where our return was 9.1% after fees. Again, the focus I want to put here is that this return was acquired by taking much less risk. So you can see a period like COVID, where this client's portfolio greatly experienced risk. Our strategy didn't. And I think it's evidence in this risk return scatter chart, where what this shows us here is you can see in this axis, this measures risk, and this axis measures return. In an ideal world, you would like to be in this top left corner. I would love to say that's true, but unfortunately that isn't the case. Where you don't want to be is in this bottom right corner, where you're taking on huge risk to get a return. What we can see from here is the red square was the client's current portfolio that was diversified with offshore equities, local equities, and local bonds. And you can see the blue circle was our strategy. You can see achieving a very, very similar return, but for much less risk. Whereas then what I'd like to recommend for the second part, which is suitable for growth, I would then like to recommend what you call it, a very, very growth-orientated strategy. As a house, we feel most of the growth will happen in offshore equities. And you can see here for the second part, we allocating it to an S&P 500 fund. Fundsmith, this is run by Terry Smith. He does a fantastic job. And then maybe a Glacier Global Stock, which is giving you a bit more of exposure to a range of different value-orientated stocks out there. And you can see this strategy here takes on much more risk. You can see the volatility. However, it compensates investors with a much higher return. So you can see the current strategy was getting 9.2% over a 5-year annualized period after fees. Our strategy was delivering 11.52%. Obviously, this does come with an enormous amount of risk, and that's why I like to separate the living annuity into two parts. So you can see here, this is taking on much more risk, this strategy, but you are getting compensated by getting about a 3% better annualized return for a 5-year period. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening into this annuity, webinar. I hope you found it insightful. And I think, as always, guys, please, pop us a mail if there's any questions. I think the purpose of it today is look at all the different mechanics of how life annuities work, how living annuities work. But again, this is just a webinar. It's looking at a very headline level of these structures. If you would like, we always do offer, free reviews. So if you'd like, we can, construct a free review and see if a life annuity would be appropriate for you, if a living annuity would be appropriate for you, if a hybrid model would be appropriate for you. We can also look at the suitability of your current living annuity funds. So yeah, please, guys, if you did enjoy this webinar, feel free just to reach out, pop supports at Rands with some mail, and then they'll get you in touch with one of our wealth advisors. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for dialing in. As always, yeah, thanks for joining.